They were ready. With everything meticulously planned, Luca contacted a guy they had connections with, and they were on their way to this secluded city in a private jet. It would take a few hours to get there, so Luca lounged in his seat, staring out of his window. Someone sat beside him, and he cast a curious glance their way, displeased to see Aya occupying the seat. She kept her eyes forward. "You look tense. Nervous?" Luca scoffed, focusing on his window again. "Careful, you're making me think you're starting to care about me." It was her turn to scoff, and he felt her typical glare on him. "Don't flatter yourself. I don't have time for you to grow soft and cause us our success." That comment had him glaring at her in return. He clenched his jaw. "I'm the least of your concerns. Last I checked, I'm not the one who keeps getting pinned in combat." He smiled arrogantly at the way her expression dropped. She regained her composure. "But you're the one with a bruised face. I'd be careful not to look so smug." When he didn't respond, she glanced at him with a sigh. "But that's not what I came over here to talk about." "Really? Could have fooled me," he muttered. She ignored him. "We never discussed our disguise." Not waiting for a question to follow his curious glance, she said, "We're posing as a married couple." "What?" He sat up, appalled. "And we're on vacation. We're visiting at the request of some close friends, and we love going to museums. We'll be visiting the museum during the day to scope out the area and return when everyone is gone. Then we'll secure the artifact and be on our way." With narrowed eyes, she sarcastically asked, "Any questions?" Luca sucked his teeth before letting his expression settle into a lazy grin. "If you liked me, you could have just said so. No need to pretend." She drove her elbow into his stomach, eliciting a winded groan from him. "I would rather be thrown from this jet and be struck by lightning as I fall to my death." She shot him a warning glare before leaving him. Luca watched her until she disappeared from his sight, unsure why he suddenly decided to tease her. He counted himself lucky she only insulted him, and considered that maybe he imagined the soft glow of red on the tips of her clove-colored ears. They arrived in the early hours of the day, settling into a fairly large, secluded lodging on top of a hill. As everyone else grabbed their bags and headed for the house, Luca shared a quick word with the pilot, reminding him of the day of their departure. And most importantly, making him swear to secrecy, which meant Enzo Romano shouldn't hear a single word about this trip. With mutual understanding, the pilot grabbed his own bag and followed him to the house. Danny wasted no time in finding the closest Chinese spot that delivered, even at 2 a.m., oddly enough, and placed an order for everyone. He already knew what Luca wanted, so Luca went to explore the house lent to them for a couple of days. After a thorough check of each room, he came up clean, leaving him to scope out the master bedroom, the type of room he always claimed when he, Danny, and Leo went out of town for heists. The room was large, which was exactly how Luca liked it. He slumped onto the king-sized bed with a groan, his muscles aching from the surprisingly long journey. Just as his eyes closed, Luca heard a door open to the side of him. "What do you think you're doing?" someone asked peevishly. Instead of opening his eyes, he said, "Trying to rest my eyes." "What does it look like?" "It looks like you're in the room I already claimed. Get out." He peeked open an eye, finding Aya standing at the foot of the bed with a scowl on her face. He closed his eyes again and waved her off. "No can do. The leader gets the biggest room." "It's the rules," she growled. "You're not my leader, so that rule doesn't apply to me." He sat up, fixing her with a stern look. "You join my gang, you're one of us." "Meaning, I'm your leader now." He lay back down. Silence met him, and in the next second, something wrapped around his calf, pulling him off the bed with surprising strength. He glared up at Aya when his head hit the carpeted floor. She only shrugged in response. He yanked his leg from her so suddenly, she flew forward, nearly landing on top of him, but he moved just in time for her to meet the ground. She snarled when he took her previous spot, and shrugged just as she had. He couldn't contain his unexplained excitement when she stood and took a fighting stance, challenging him for the room. Loser would leave without a rebuttal. He all but eagerly accepted. They each landed precise blows to their opponent, making the match draw out a lot longer than expected. But Luca was stronger, and he planned to take advantage of that. He planned to overpower her, but Aya was too quick, sending him to the ground. In a move she must have picked up from being put in so many times now, she pinned Luca to the ground, signifying her victory. Her breaths were heavy as she boasted of her triumph over him. "I win." He stared up at her, still immobilized. "Yeah, you do." She made no indication to release him as she continued to stare into his eyes. Everything seemed to grow quiet around them as they kept eye contact, a certain intensity passing through their gazes. Luca thought he saw something other than emptiness flash in her eyes, but she was off him too soon to confirm. He started for the door, knowing he had overstayed his visit, but paused as he opened it. "You know, we could always just share the room, wife." He scarcely dodged the hard object flying towards his head as he hurriedly closed the door behind him, a laugh rumbling in his chest. The next day, Luca put on his disguise, his lip lifting in disgust at the unseemly fake mustache Danny insisted he wear, along with a short and wavy blonde wig. Although the weather was fairly warm, he had to put on a thin button-down to conceal the many tattoos covering his arms. Lastly, he put in simple brown eye contact lenses to hide the strikingly blue appearance of his natural eye color, eyes that were the same color as his dad's. "Ready?" he asked Aya, who was securing a pair of gold dangling earrings in her ears. He had to admit the disguises were effective ones. They might actually get away with the disguise aspect of the plot, but he pondered if they could imitate a happily married couple. With the way Luca provoked her last night and the way she always seemed eager to rip his head off, he doubted it. Aya nodded briskly, securing her earpiece. She then turned to Leo, Brooklyn, and Danny, who would all be staying behind. "If anything goes awry, we'll use our code. If not, proceed as planned." They all nodded, and Luca felt a pang of jealousy at the way they so easily seemed to forget about him being in charge. Aya and Luca left, making their way to Ranique Museum. Fortunately, it wasn't too crowded, giving them a way to scope out the area but still blend in with everyone else. They approached the entrance, showed their tickets, and proceeded inside. Everything looked simple enough, as simple as a museum should look. There were labeled exhibits, and many articles plastered to the walls to read about the historical information. "This way," Aya hissed, grabbing his arm to maneuver him in a different direction. She almost immediately released him. For some reason, they managed to catch the attention of a security guard. The security guard's eyes narrowed on them in suspicion, making Luca tense. On his side, Aya grabbed his hand, interlacing their fingers. Her other hand wrapped around his arm as she pressed herself into his side. That seemed to lessen the security guard's suspicion, and he nodded at Luca. He returned the gesture. As they passed, Aya said in a low voice, "Try not to be so tense. You'll give us away." He ignored the disdain in her voice and forced his muscles to relax, gently squeezing her hand in return. She made one last turn and stopped in front of a glassed exhibit. Inside lay the beautiful artifact, thought to be a myth. Ophelia's rose. Made out of the rarest gemstone and manipulated to form an iridescent rose, the name was wisely chosen. Luca released Aya's hand to observe it closely. It was real, and they'd have it in their possession by the end of the night. If things went to plan, they didn't stay long, but before they left, Luca stood behind Aya, appearing to be embracing her as his arms encircled her waist. He leaned his head down to rest his chin on top of her head. He ignored the way she faltered at his touch, instead paying close attention to the way her hand brushed the bottom of the artifact's glass casing, attaching a hard-to-see gadget to it. She turned her head the smallest fraction, their faces inches apart. Through a forced smile of endearment, she signaled her success, and they left. Night draped its obsidian curtain over the sky, and diamond-like stars poked through, ushering in the beginning of the heist. Luca pulled the ski mask over his face, finding it hard to follow after Aya's small and swift form. They made it back to the museum and it was completely deserted aside from a singular patrol car. With Danny hacked into the security system, they had nothing to worry about regarding the security guards scaling the premises. They crept into the entrance after Aya effectively broke the lock and headed straight for the apple of their eyes. With the night vision goggles they wore, everything was visible to them. Luca scanned the dreary interior in fascination, nearly toppling over Aya when she abruptly stopped and stooped low. She silently looked at him, and he knew she was glaring. He was quick to crouch alongside her. "Sorry." He only received a scoff as Aya continued her pursuit, and he swallowed the snarky remark he would have given her if they weren't on a mission. In mere minutes, they were in front of the thick glass encasing Ophelia's rose. Aya wasted no time in approaching the glass and touching the small gadget she'd hidden earlier. It gave a small beep before it began vibrating. The low buzz could only be heard if you leaned close enough, making it perfect for keeping them concealed. Aya pulled out a pen-like gadget, pressing a button on its side, and a red laser shot out of the tip. She aimed it at the glass and began carving a tedious hole into it, big enough for her hand to fit through and retrieve the artifact. Luca watched in amazement at her expertise, the way she was careful not to make a single mistake in her work. She kept a steady hand for 10 minutes straight, but Luca was starting to lose patience. Just as he considered walking off to observe something else to pass the time, the sound of deep voices and shuffling boots grabbed his attention. He straightened, casting a quick look at Aya. She wasn't paying attention. Luca cursed under his breath. The boots were coming closer. He took hold of Aya's arm, pulling her towards anything that could momentarily hide them. She resisted his attempts. "What are you?" "Shh," he sharply whispered, yanking her away from her work. "Someone's coming." He frantically searched for a hiding place, his mind running a mile a minute. They wouldn't have enough time. Where were Leo and Brooklyn? They were supposed to give a signal if they saw anyone. And why hadn't Danny said anything? He swallowed a growl at the incompetence of his team and pushed Aya into a giant locker. He quietly closed it behind them, covering them in darkness. They stood so close that Luca could feel the inhale and exhale of Aya's every breath. He managed to calm his own breathing, but hers was fairly loud, almost panicked. "Oh no," he thought, and what was worse? The sound of booted shoes was growing closer. A booming voice ordered them to spread out and look everywhere. He cursed again, pulling up his mask to let in more air. "You have to be quiet," Luca said as quietly as he could. "They'll hear us." "I can't," she gasped, her body trembling, and her voice came out strangled. He knew by now the men would be mere feet away from their hiding spot, and her breathing was still too loud. He had to do something. Anything. He grabbed Aya's shoulders, roughly pressing his mouth to hers. She let out a gasp of surprise, but her panic ceased. She tried to attack him after she recovered from her shock, but he held on even tighter, vaguely acknowledging retreating steps and murmured voices. When the coast was clear, he broke the kiss, releasing her from his hold. As she caught her breath, she took a handful of his shirt, forcing him down to her height. Even in the dark, he could sense the deadly glare her hazel eyes held. "If you ever do that again, I'll bite your tongue clean off," she threatened. He raised his hands in defense. "Noted." She harshly pushed him away and opened the locker, leaving him momentarily stunned as she stormed out. Never had he forced a woman into an embrace, not that he had to, and he wouldn't make a habit of it now. He made a mental note to apologize if they came out of this alive, but in the meantime, he prayed he'd never do that again, despite part of him wanting to. He joined Aya and was surprised to see her heading towards the exit. He dared to grab her arm and say, "Ophelia's rose is that way." He pointed in the direction of it for extra measure. She yanked her arm free and continued for the exit. "We don't have time. Let's go." Luca hesitated and glanced back, considering going to retrieve it for himself, but another one of Enzo's rules played in his mind. Don't risk your life for anything. That's what your men are for. Knowing Aya wasn't going back for it, he had no choice but to follow after her. They burst through the doors and kept running until the museum was well out of sight. They rounded a corner and hid in the safety of a dark alley, catching their breaths. Luca recovered sooner, feeling anger simmer in his chest. He removed his goggles and glared at Aya, who was bent as she caught her breath.
"Why did you run away? We could have gotten it." When she didn't answer, he continued. "And what was that back there? There's no way you're afraid of the dark. What are you, 5?
His questions earned him a glare, but not a reply. He got in her face. "The only reason I agreed to work with you was to get Ophelia's rose. There's no way we can go back now. Our plan is screwed." He huffed out several breaths, daring her to come up with some sorry excuse. She only straightened, reached into her pocket, slammed a hard object into his chest, and left him standing alone in the alleyway. Luca caught the object, staring down at Ophelia's rose in surprise. Some way, somehow, she managed to steal it. Luca turned in the direction she headed in amazement, his hand tightening on the almost priceless artifact in his very hands. They were going home. The jet was well into the sky and on its way. Luca hadn't said a word to anyone last night when he and Aya rejoined Leo and Brooklyn, who peered down at Ophelia's rose in amazement. He only glared at them, which Leo ignored, and Brooklyn quickly looked away, almost guiltily. He'd done the same to Danny, who only shrugged, claiming he didn't see anyone in the footage, but there was a certain look in his eyes that said otherwise. But that didn't excuse Leo. He was watching Brooklyn converse with Aya about something Luca couldn't hear with an odd expression on his face, one Luca had never seen before. Luca cleared his throat. "We need to talk." Leo stood without a second thought and followed him to the front of the jet, where no one could hear. They managed to grab Aya and Brooklyn's attention, but he pretended not to notice. He faced Leo with a hard expression. "Where were you and Brooklyn yesterday?" "In the spot you had us camping out in," Leo answered briskly. "Then why weren't we informed of the mass of men storming into the museum? They would have passed you." He crossed his arms, waiting for an answer. Leo averted his eyes, prompting Luca to say, "Don't tell me you two were distracted." Leo tensed, making Luca blow out a breath of frustration. "Seriously? I agreed to work with them so we could get Ophelia's rose, not get you a girlfriend." He ran a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I wonder if you and Danny want me to be killed in one of these heists. You're never where I need you to be." Luca silently paced, only stopping when Leo suddenly spoke. "I'm sorry." The sound of such a sincere apology made Luca freeze. He glanced at Leo and saw that he was serious. He had no choice but to forgive him. It's what God would have wanted anyway. Luca often scolded himself for bringing God into his mess, but it seemed the only thing he could do. Only God would understand him anyway. "Look, I'm not asking you to break things off, but I need you to focus. They're expecting us to hold up our half of the bargain since they held theirs, and this next part is crucial." He lowered his voice so only Leo could hear. "I planned a meeting with my dad next month, and I need things to go smoothly. If it doesn't, it can cost me my head, and everyone else is here, so I'm counting on you, Leo." Luca's plan was something he hadn't told anyone yet. He was waiting for the perfect time, and that time would determine the loyalty of the ones he called friends, even brothers, for many years.